Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Hello. Hello. This is My Life DIY and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Rippin' Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to DarkWolf's Den.
The DarkWolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the DarkWolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. That's right. We're ripping through the electromagnetic soup, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the DarkWolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get a visit from the Men in Black. That's right, you can't talk about UFOs as much as we do, especially the last 3 episodes, without expecting a visit from the Men in Black. That's right, they're going to be visiting us tonight here in the DarkWolf's Den Show. That's our topic for tonight. We're going to discuss the real stories of the Men in Black, ladies and gentlemen. That is tonight, March 31st, 2021, on the DarkWolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. On this day in 1983, Monty Python's The Meaning of Life is released in the U.S. And I don't know about you guys, but I love me some Monty Python. And that is today's Today in History. You gotta love some Monty Python, right? I absolutely adore British comedy, but that's not for everybody, is it? And something I enjoy. Something else I enjoy is paranormal topics, right? In the last 3 weeks, we went over the Musicians and UFOs series, and we've talked a lot about UFOs and abductions, but one thing that happens when you have a abduction or a UFO sighting, even a lot of times, you'll have a group of people show up all of a sudden to try to silence the witnesses. At least this used to happen a lot more than it's reported to nowadays, although there are a lot of reported cases. But what are these mysterious people that step in to try to silence UFO witnesses? Who are these men in black? Well, here to tell us about it tonight is researcher Nick Redfern, ladies and gentlemen.
Way of asking the question is, what are the Men in Black, rather than who are they?
Okay, Nick, then what are the Men in Black?
I guess a lot of our beliefs and perceptions of them come from the Men in Black movies. You know, people think of the Men in Black outside of the UFO community. They think of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones.
And as we know, Hollywood puts out a lot of alien-themed material, including the Men in Black movie, of course.
You know, that's the image that we have, that the Men in Black work for a super-secret government agency whose job it is to silence UFO researchers and to silence UFO witnesses. And they do that by knocking on the front door, going into people's homes and zapping them with this device, which either wipes the memory out completely, or they create this hypnotic suggestion that, well, you didn't see a UFO, you saw the planet Venus, or you saw a weather balloon, or you saw a weather balloon going past the planet Venus, you know, if they just want to screw with you even more. And the movies, you know, they're good, fun, action-packed pictures, but ironically, they're about as far away as you can get from the truth of the real Men in Black. And a lot of people don't realise that. They think that the movies are based on reality.
The only thing reality-based in those movies is the name?
The movie's actually based on a comic book series of the same name. And the comic books were inspired by reports of people who said they'd seen a UFO and somebody came knocking on the front door and they let the person in. They flashed an ID card, something like that, sat down and basically said, we don't want you to talk about your UFO experience. And that literally is the gist of it.
So, though the comic book was what the movie was based on, the comic book itself was actually based on real reports of Men in Black visits from whoever these guys are to UFO researchers and experiencers.
But when you actually speak to the witnesses, you find that they're nothing like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. That's sort of the Hollywood imagery.
And the real Men in Black are much, much creepier than the Hollywood version.
The real Men in Black are kind of described as sort of only 5 feet to 5 feet 5 tall, very white skin, very pale, looking kind of like a cross between anorexic and emaciated and anemic. You know, they just don't look well. And they wear these sort of out-of-time suits, they wear old-style fedora hats, and they don't seem familiar with our customs and, you know, the way we act normally.
If anybody has ever seen the TV show Fringe, they had a group of Men in Black on there that pretty well fit this description better than most of the, quote, Men in Black, end quote, portrayed in Hollywood.
And so everything about him is a little bit weird and off. But where it gets confusing is that there are government people who are aware of the weirder Men in Black, and when they're doing UFO investigations, sometimes they've actually, I guess, sort of copied the design of the weirder Men in Black to cover their tracks. So in other words, you've got sort of two groups of MIB running around.
Well, that's going to add a whole new layer of difficulty to this investigation, isn't it?
And the government people may actually not really know who these weirder MIB are, but they realise that it acts as a good cover for them. And that's why the whole mystery is so strange.
I am a lot of times inclined to believe that the government doesn't know any more about the ufology situation than we do. And I have a feeling us researchers may actually know just a little bit more than the government does about it. But these Men in Black, this is a way that possibly could be used by both whatever the Men in Black really are, and we'll get into that here in just a moment, but also as well as government agents who are trying to cover the tracks and still silence UFO witnesses. As a matter of fact, these Men in Black stories were probably the best thing that happened to the government as far as a way to create a cover-up.
So what I'm going to do is sort of go back to the beginning for you and explain how and why the Men in Black mystery began and how it's become what it is today.
And of course, the best place to start any investigation is at the beginning.
Now, the whole thing sort of pretty much began in 1956 with that book, which is called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, by an author named Gray Barker. And Gray Barker died in 1984, but he grew up and worked in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And when the whole UFO thing kicked off in '47, he got involved with it, doing investigations and writing about it and putting little newsletters together, things like that. And in the 50s began writing books on the subject. And that was actually his first full-length book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And as you can see from the picture, you've got these three sort of shadowy, dark-suited characters. And that is really when the whole Men in Black mystery began. Now, if we go back to sort of '47, when Kenneth Arnold had his sightings in Washington State, and the thing really kicked off, there were legitimate examples where government agents had went out to the homes of UFO witnesses to interview them.
Remember, this is in the 1940s, before the government has clearly established the cover-up.
But of course, back in the 40s, you know, all the guys wore dark suits and fedora hats, which is how the Men in Black look. So some cases of just legitimate but innocent visitations to people's homes weren't actually done by the Men in Black. It was just that that's how government people dressed back then. And that's why, again, it gets confusing, because you've got to try and figure out which are the real Men in Black and which are just government people wearing regulation suits and hats.
But of course, the suit isn't the only part of the Men in Black. It is the most well-known part, the black suit, of course, but it's not the only thing about it. Remember, they had the pale skin and the weird acting. So, like he said, because in the 1940s they did dress like that, it is hard to distinguish, but the question is now, why do the MIB continue to dress like that when that style has went out in the government a long time ago?
But nevertheless, that sort of imagery became sort of infamous and famous in the 50s because a lot of the MIB turned up at people's homes in groups of 3. And that book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, tells the story of a man named Albert Bender. And Albert Bender was one of the earliest UFO researchers.
Bender was a pioneer in the field of ufology, and definitely an unsung hero when it comes to ufology research, and some of the pioneers that began the research back in the very beginning. Of course, Bender was a very popular researcher back in the late 40s and early 50s.
Bender was a bit of an unusual character, and he was someone who was as much interested in the UFO subject and the world of the paranormal in the non-fiction realm as he was in the world of fiction as well. He was sort of heavily into horror authors like Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, but he really got him on board with the UFO subject as well. Well, he set up this group, the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and in no time at all he got comments and letters from all around the world, New Zealand, Australia, South America, Canada, Europe, people all asking, how can we join the IFSB? Can we subscribe to your magazine? Can we become investigators for your group? Bender sort of found himself very much overwhelmed by this. So after work at night, he'd sort of be typing away in the attic, responding to all these letters and so on. And literally in no time, he had, I think, somewhere in the region of about 800 or 900 subscribers, which for that period, when the UFO subject really began, that was an incredible amount, for that era. This was obviously, long before email and even faxes and, even before computers. It was all done on those old things known as typewriters, where you had to actually lick a stamp to send the magazine off to people,
So when I started iMac and we started the YouTube channel for it, it didn't take very long, maybe a month or so, to get 1,000 subs. And you guys might say, well, yeah, that's really nothing. Well, you got to consider this guy did the same thing in a time before any modern amenities, minus maybe a typewriter. And he used the typewriter to create the whole magazine and everything else. He put the word out and people poured in. Hey guys, I'm doing this UFO stuff. What do you think? And everybody and their brother had a story all across the world. Everybody wanted to be involved in this. And that is absolutely amazing. To get that kind of turnout that quickly is nothing shy of incredible for that time.
And so that was the situation that Bender was in. He had this great group going, and what he did, what made it all the more mysterious, was after about the 3rd or 4th issue of the magazine, he suddenly just, out of the blue, shut it down. Wanted nothing else to do with it, refunded everybody's money that was outstanding, and said, I'm leaving the UFO subject. And he didn't really explain why that was.
Now, for a guy who was so very interested in the topic, to the point that he sent out and said, hey, I'm going to do this, and started the magazine and put all the time and effort into it, it's really strange for him to walk away from this altogether, especially as abruptly as he did. Was there a reason why he just suddenly changed his mind on everything? Surely it wasn't just too overwhelming. I would be excited if I were him in that position at that time.
But he alluded to several friends that he'd had a visit from 3 guys in black suits who warned him that if he knew what was good for him, if he knew what was good for his health, he would back away from the subject and stay away from it and not come back. And whatever it was, it sort of scared the life out of him. He just didn't want any more to do with it. But because he only sort of made this veiled allusion to what actually happened, nobody really got the full story, and that included Gray Barker. And Gray Barker was one of Albert Bender's best friends. And so Barker wrote the book using the little bit of information that he had, and suggested that the MIB were representatives of one from the FBI, one from the CIA, and one from the Air Force.
Which, given the time frame, that would actually make sense, because the Air Force was quite interested in the original ufology subject.
And so this sort of gave rise to the idea that the Men in Black were government agents and that Bender had been shut down by the government because he was getting too close to the truth. And he only came back very, very briefly in 1962 when he wrote a book himself called Flying Saucers and the Three Men. And that book was actually published by Gray Barker, because as well as being an author, Barker was also a publisher himself as well. And so he put this book out from Bender because people have been tracking Bender down and wanting to speak to him, and he just didn't want anything to do with it. And he thought, well, maybe he went out of the subject in the wrong way, that he should have just, not just walked away, he should have made a definitive statement. So that's what he did with his book. When you read his book, the three Men in Black are described as very, very different to the assumptions that people like Gray Barker had made in their book.
Now, wait a second. If you guys remember the conclusions drawn in the original book, it was that it was three government agents, right? We just discussed this. That it was government agents that came and visited Mr. Bender. So what would be different in Mr. Bender's book that would define it differently than the conclusions drawn already? Because the conclusions drawn seem quite logical, right?
Bender talks about how, and this is what makes it kind of interesting, because it doesn't just deal with UFOs, but it deals with sort of the paranormal and the occult. Bender, as I said, was heavily into some sort of weird occult stuff. And he talked about how on a number of occasions, when he was in his room late at night, he'd start to feel dizzy and lightheaded and faint, and he'd have to lie down on the bed. And he said when he would lay down on the bed, he would suddenly be overwhelmed by this smell of like brimstone or sulfur, which is like a classic aspect of paranormal folklore and mythology and fact.
As well as demonology, which is what this reminds me of.
And he said when that overpowering smell would appear in the room, he would see these three shadowy figures materialize literally through the wall. And they never really had like a full form where you could see like the face, the eyes, the body, the hands. They were far more like that. If you imagine you'd speak to somebody like that, you just, it doesn't happen. But that's what Bender said they looked like. And so in other words, they were like an ethereal, shadowy type of person.
A shadow being, if you will.
And he would get these telepathic messages saying, you will stop this research and walk away from it, or else. That was just the essence of it. And so he wrote about that in his book and explained about how, at first, he sort of denied all the threats and said, no, I'm going to carry on what I was doing. Well, Bender was someone who was heavily into horror movies and sci-fi movies, and the little town in which he lived, there was just one cinema there, and he was kind of a solitary character, so Saturday nights he would always go down to the cinema on his own and watch movies. And Bender said that he would get this feeling that there was one of these Men in Black in the cinema, and all the lights are down, and he would look into the corner and he would see like this shadowy silhouette of this guy in a black suit and a black fedora, and these glowing eyes, had sort of penetrating, glowing, silvery eyes. And so he wasn't a local, in other words, hopefully. But so this would go on sort of week after week. Then when he'd be walking home from the cinema, he would see them in the shadows of the alleyways, just stood there, staring, and they were, clearly trying to intimidate him. And unfortunately, it worked to the point where he actually became quite paranoid, and his health began to suffer both psychologically and physically. He started getting pummeling headaches. And he also got what, in occult terms, has become known as psychic backlash.
And some of you may have heard of psychic backlash. This is actually quite intriguing of a phenomenon in and of itself.
That's where it's like in simple terms, like a run of bad luck. Like every day is your worst Monday morning possible. Electrical equipment would blow up. Just everything would be a complete disaster. And it was only when he walked away from the subject that this all subsided and finally went away. So he basically got the message. But as I said, Bender's book really changed things from the 50s, in the early 60s when he wrote this book, 62, to this other image of the MIB that people were starting to develop, the idea that, well, hang on, we thought in the 50s when Barker wrote his book, it was the government's. Now Bender in 62 is saying, no, it's almost, something straight out of Edgar Allan Poe mixed in with flying saucers in some bizarre fashion, which makes it all the more difficult to try and figure out, well, what's the origins of the UFO phenomenon? Does that mean it's not extraterrestrial? Is that paranormal as well?
And some people do very much believe that the UFO subject isn't extraterrestrial at all, but actually may very well be demons or fallen angels or a multitude of other theories surround the topic.
Or are the MIB sort of keeping watch on people who are not just in the UFO subject, but in all aspects of the paranormal? And it seems to be the case that that's actually what it is. We're finding examples where the MIB have monitored people involved in Bigfoot research, in paranormal research, people who use Ouija boards, all sorts of stuff. So, again, this takes us far, far away from Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, and which is more based around the Gray Barker book and, the government silencing people.
And I can tell you, in 28 years of paranormal research, I personally have never had a visit from the Men in Black. Even though they seem to be visiting the den this evening in topic only, luckily. I've never actually had a physical visit from a Men in Black, because Lord knows if I did, I would grab every camera and video camera and recording device and everything I could to make sure I got a witness of these Men in Black, because I, as a paranormal researcher, want to definitely record any kind of incidents that would occur like that. But I have not in my life had any incidents with the Men in Black yet.
But as I said, it is confusing when in the 50s people like the FBI and the CIA did wear fedoras and black suits. So it's kind of like who's copying who? Was one using camouflage against the other, or were they both actually doing it? That's not a Man in Black. That's actually Brad Steiger, who's a very famous paranormal author. And I titled that MIB The Second Wave because Brad was someone who came into the subject in the early 1960s in terms of investigating the Men in Black. And like a lot of people who've investigated them, not just the witnesses, he started to kind of have interactions with the MIB as well.
Maybe I need to start studying the MIB a little bit harder, right? Maybe that'll get their attention. I tell you, as much as I've studied in my life, if I'm not on a government list at this point, those guys are seriously backlogged, right?
She had a friend who was spending some time on vacation in London, and he phoned Brad up and said, these weird guys have been following me around London, on the tube station, around the streets. And Brad's like, well, what do they look like? And he said they got these black suits on, these black fedora hats, sort of little guys about 5 feet tall, and they kind of got oriental features and, skin like a colour of a bottle of milk or something like that, And Brad instantly realised, he was talking about the Men in Black. And on one occasion, they actually approached Brad's friend and said, you're a friend of Brad Steiger, and it was more a statement than a question. And the guy was like a bit taken aback, to be surrounded by these 4 little guys just staring at him, like a dog about to bite or something. And he said, well, yes, I am. And he said, tell Steiger that we will visit him at Christmas time, which kind of sounds a bit ominous, It's like the worst or the best you can expect at Christmas for a visit is Santa Claus, I guess. You don't expect 3 or 4 creepy MIB to turn up.
I gotta say, that's not exactly the Christmas visitor I would be expecting, right? But I gotta say, when it comes to myself, I'm a little weird. As a paranormal researcher, I would love to run into an MIB. I would find a way to pick this person's brain for hours, as long as I could. I would turn the conversation around 100%, right?
But unfortunately, they didn't. They didn't turn up. But what they did, it kind of put this feeling in Brad that he was being watched. But to Brad's credit, he was one of these people who was like, well, bring it on. If the MIB want to come round, bring it on, and I'll be waiting for them. but he didn't get the visit.
And I gotta say, I really like Mr. Steiger's attitude towards that. That's myself through and through. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the clock has got us. We gotta go ahead and take a network break right here, and we'll be right back with the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show after these messages. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Howl! That's right. Jerry Hicks kicks off a holiday weekend with Easter weekend has officially begun. Hi, everyone. It's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. If you're enjoying tonight's Men in Black, The Look by Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den Show, and you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den will return again tomorrow night, Thursday, April 1st, 2021, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Come along with him as he howls at Magical Aromas. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm curious. I can't wait to find out. Then Friday, April 2nd, come along with me as we journey through tinkerers. That's right. You know somebody who likes to tinker with things? We're going to explore the rabbit hole of tinkerers together. Then Saturday, April 3rd, get ready for calendar stones. Let's look at calendar stones and what they mean and how it's possible they could be off in 2021. I'm going to have a lot of information to share with you. Saturday, April 3rd, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, and then we'll end out the weekend right together with a look at Easter Island. Of course, it is Easter Sunday night. Now, I know it's the first weekend of the month, and unfortunately, we just can't have the Fantastic Fun Show on a holiday. I think it goes against our rules, and let me just confirm that. Eugene, are we canceling the Fantastic Fun Show?
My answer is yes. I think it is certain.
And there you have it. I was going to leave it up to him, but now it is official. We have canceled the Fantastic Fun Show for this month, and we will end out the weekend right together Sunday night with a look at Easter Island in honor of Easter, the holiday. Does that mean My Life DIY stays seated on the throne?
My answer is I think it is possible, but not certain.
I think it is possible, but not certain. We'll have to figure out the rules for situations like this. But there are no rules. Nevertheless, fantastic fun weekend will extend a little bit longer for you as a result. And it will head into the week. In fact, Tuesday Night Videos returns April 6th to the Backstage VIP Lounge with your host, Champion Sports Nation. It's going to be one-hit wonders. Now back to Jerry Hicks and the Darkwolf's Den, howling at the Men in Black.
This is My Life DIY, and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey, everybody, it's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, a.k.a. Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Darkwolf's Den.
The Darkwolf's Den Show on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the DarkWolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are, of course, getting a visit from the Men in Black. That's right, luckily only in topic only. And in the first half, we discussed a couple stories of the origins of the Men in Black. And where we left off was talking about Mr. Brad Steiger and how he had an involvement with the Men in Black and how his was different than a lot of other cases going forward.
Brad did have a number of experiences like this where it was almost like a intriguing bit of psychological intimidation where they wouldn't approach Brad, but they'd made sure that his friends heard the stories and knew that they would get back to Brad.
And of course, there's a lot more ways than one to hurt a man, and to mess with one's social circle is definitely a way to mess with someone. And I've heard of Men in Black going to the employers of people and just basically slandering them, saying they're involved with this and that, and or sending FBI agents, or I've heard of the Men in Black doing a lot of different things to researchers to try to shut them down in their normal life if they refuse to comply with the orders. However, when you face them like Brad Steiger, sometimes you get a different approach from the Men in Black.
And I guess some people have like a nervous mindset, like Albert Bender certainly was. It freaked him out and he didn't walk away from the subject, he ran. Brad was standing by the front door with his fists clenched, waiting for him to turn up. So that might give you some sort of bit of intriguing insight as to how the MIB work. They target people in different ways, depending on their personal character.
Which suggests that they have done their homework and they know what kind of reaction they're going to get from the person, which is probably why I've never had a visit from them before, right?
People often ask, is there any evidence, hard evidence, of the MIB?
Which is a very good question. The answer to which you might be surprised about, actually.
Beyond just the witness testimony. We've got a lot of, literally probably thousands of reports altogether, and also what I call a lot of silent MIB reports where, people sometimes come up to me at conferences and relate a story and they're like, but don't ever publish it. I don't want nothing doing with it, but I just wanted to share it in case it helps sort of open doors and adds to the story. And they're the people who are just sitting on stories and, don't really want to talk about them at all, at least publicly. So we're really not sure how many there are, but certainly the known ones are in the thousands. But for the most part, there isn't sort of physical evidence, and I'll talk about why that might be shortly.
That's not entirely true. Actually, the Men in Black kind of slipped up a little bit and got caught. Check this out.
But that's Tim Beckley. Now, Tim lives in New York, and he has been a long-time player in the UFO subject. He got into it when he was a kid. Tim was friends with another guy named Jim Mosley. That's Jim. Jim died last year. At the time, in the 60s, Jim didn't live too far from Tim Beckley, so they did a lot of research and work together. And they had a couple of friends, Jack and Mary Robinson, who lived in Jersey City. And they ran a UFO group. And they were sort of really high-profile group in the early 1960s through the late 60s. And Mary stayed at home and Jim went out to work. Jack Robinson, he went out to work. And on a number of occasions, Mary, when Jack got home, said, there was this weird guy just stood outside of the apartment. They were like the third story up or the second story up. And Jack's like, well, what do you mean a weird guy? And she said, well, he looks like these Men in Black that everybody's talking about. He's got like a black suit on, black sunglasses, black fedora. He's got like this weird sort of hypnotic zombie look, blank look on his face. And he just keeps staring up at the apartment. And she's like, well, for how long? He's like there all day, he don't move. He's just like a statue. And this went on for like 4 or 5 days. And by the end of that, Mary was like frightened out of her mind. And of course, Jack had to go to work. He got a 9-to-5 job. You know, he couldn't tell the boss, hey, I've got to stay at home to look out for the men in black. You know, he probably got his cards, you know, and get fired.
And as we know, intimidation is definitely their main tool of use. But Mary was just a little bit smarter than them.
So what Mary did, she phoned Tim and said, hey, Tim, you know, you're into these MIB stories. I've got a great story for you. Nobody can catch these guys. Well, this one's here outside the apartment every single day of this week. So Tim's like, well, this is great, you know, let's get over there. So he then phones Jim. Jim's the camera guy. He never used to go anywhere without a camera. And I think, you know, Jim had one of the biggest photo collections in relation to UFOs, you know, not just UFOs, but just ufologists goofing off at conferences or whatever, you know, all the behind-the-scenes stuff as well. And so Jim and Tim headed off to Jersey City, where Jack and Mary Robinson lived. And this was sort of 8 o'clock in the morning, because Mary said, well, he always turns up sort of 8:30. So they're driving around Jersey City, 8 o'clock, and of course, rush hour. It took them a couple of minutes or a couple of turns around the block to try and find a parking space. But on the first time around the block, they actually saw this guy. And so Tim's driving and Jim's leaning like 3 foot out the window to try and get a good picture of this guy as they slow down to like 5 miles an hour, and snaps off a picture of him. And I'll show you, I've got 2 shots of the picture. One, it's a little bit difficult to see him, but it's like the full picture. Then I've got sort of a slightly grainy blow up, but you'll still be able to hopefully see it.
And yes, this is the picture that I have on the thumbnail on YouTube for tonight. So those listening on the radio, if you're interested in the picture, definitely join us over on YouTube at the Rippin' Rabbit Hole YouTube channel, or on the upload later on the Darkwolf's Den Show YouTube channel. And you'll definitely see this picture here. And it's one of the only pictures that I know of that is pure, hard evidence of a real man in black.
There's his hat, there's the point. He's got the glasses, there's his face, his suit, white collar. That looks like his hand holding something. That's obviously his legs right down to there. Now, if you look, I know it's hard to see, but he's got kind of like this stare, he's just staring out. And that actual doorway there, that's just a doorway of an old building. You know, he was just kind of standing there doing nothing at all except looking up. Well, actually there he's looking across, but he was looking up at Mary and Jack's building. And that picture was taken on the first run around the block by Jim Mosley. And as you can see, there's a car there. And they're trying to, you know, get as close as they can before the guy behind them's blasting on the horn, you know, sort of get out the way or whatever.
If this is a real MIB that we're trying to get a shot of, or they were trying to get a shot of, I should say, definitely don't want to be causing a scene with the guy blowing the horn and stuff and scare him off, because that might ruin your shot for sure. But it definitely would give the game away that they've been caught.
You can look at it in 2 ways. It's a man in black, or it's a man who happens to be dressed in a black suit. You know, we don't really know.
And that is fair. It could just be coincidence. But again, looking back at the entire case file, why does this weird man in this black suit that just happens to be dressed this way just also happen to be stalking this apartment for over a week? I mean, it is odd. So I would say it's a MIB, but again, it's open to interpretation because there's no definitive answer there.
What we can say for sure is that when Jim and Tim came around the corner, he'd gone. And this wasn't like a huge block, you know, it was just one building that came round, and by that time he'd gone. And that was, interestingly enough, the last day he was seen. So it was almost, you know, he got rumbled, he got found out, and he didn't turn up again. But that is one of the very few pictures we've got on record of a man in black. And, you know, regardless of what you think of it, he does look kind of odd. You know, just stood there like that, and just bolt upright like that, and just staring outwards. And even, you know, why would you even be in a doorway like that? You know, if you're going to be in a doorway, either you're coming in the building or you're going out. And if he was waiting for a bus or something like that.
And if he was waiting on the bus, why was he standing there the entire time that her husband was at work? Now, that doesn't make sense either. Yeah, something weird about this guy.
Well, why hide back in the doorway? You'd be at the edge of the road by the bus stop. So nothing about him makes any sense. And as I said with Mary, she saw him for like 6 or 7 hours a day. And, you know, that's sort of alone, if you like, is sort of a very weird aspect of it. Which then sort of begs the question, well, what are the men in black? And that's where we get into the theories.
And though we've only heard 2 or 3 case files tonight, there is, like Mr. Redfern mentioned earlier, thousands of case files of the men in black.
That's an aerial shot of the Pentagon. And I don't actually deny that some reports are government people, as I said, particularly in the period when the 40s, 50s and the 60s, you know, most guys never left the house without putting on a fedora-type hat, you know, and you're going to work, you've got a black suit and a tie on. That's how the FBI dressed, the CIA dressed. So in some of those cases, I think there are some examples of the MIB working for government, but I don't think they necessarily thought of themselves as MIB. They were just going out to investigate and interview.
By interview, he means silence.
Witnesses. Now, the biggest irony is that through the Freedom of Information Act, we now actually have documents from the 60s where the Air Force and the FBI sent memos out saying members of the US, I'm paraphrasing, but saying members of the US public have reported encounters with men dressed in black suits and black hats and threatening their lives. We need to find out who they are.
Now, wait a minute. That adds an intriguing piece of the puzzle.
So in other words, you've got internal memos from the Air Force and the FBI saying who are the men in black, you know, which clearly suggests, you know, if the government is asking literally who the hell are they, chances are it's not the government, unless the government has got its hands on, you know, hundreds and hundreds of 5-foot-tall men with white faces and bulging eyes and menacing looks and, you know, endless numbers of black suits and fedoras. They're not working for the government, you know.
With compartmentalization aside, I would definitely say that that's a logical conclusion to draw.
But there is a government angle. Now, it gets weirder because there might be some examples where the government occasionally have mimicked and copied the actions of the weirder MIB to try and cover their tracks. So we've got the real men in black, we've got government people dressed in 50s style suits and hats, and then we've got maybe some people in government who have employed the folklore of the stranger MIB as a cover.
Which helps to do nothing but muddy the waters in an investigation like this.
That basically is sort of a concise history of the reports and the theories. And so I guess when people ask me, you know, are the MIB government people? You know, are they aliens? Are they time travelers? Are they energy-sucking vampires? You know, are they paranormal? Are they demons? And people say, well, what do you think they are? I say, yes.
And there is that weird aspect, too, almost like they have to be invited in the house, kind of like the vampire lore, right? And there's so much more about the topic that we can't even get to tonight. But what do you guys think, ladies and gentlemen? We heard what Nick Redfern thinks about the topic, but what do you think? Do you think the MIB are a real phenomenon? Are they just government agents trying to mess with people and silence witnesses and get people to back off of the UFO topic? Are they something else? Are they an interdimensional creature, a fallen angel, a demon, if you will, a vampire of sorts? Could they be a variety of paranormal creatures, or are they humans with paranormal technology, or technology that we just don't quite comprehend? Are the MIB movies closer to truth, or are they just a little play on reality? In the end, ladies and gentlemen, all you can do is look at the evidence, use a little common sense, and in the end, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the DarkWolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. The den may be closing for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, but don't you worry. We're just getting started with this weekend kickoff party. That's right, the weekend fun is only just begun. Tomorrow we will be back with an all-new episode of the DarkWolf's Den Show for April 1st, 2021. April Fool's Day, that's right. We're going to talk about a substance that fooled science for many, many years, and we've only recently began to discover, but the ancients knew about for a long time. That is the element of Ormus. So make sure you tune in for that discussion tomorrow night on Magical Ormus, April 1st, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on the DarkWolf's Den Radio Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Then on Friday, April 2nd, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Our network partner, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, takes to the airwaves with the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. On Friday, April 2nd, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, he'll be talking about tinkerers. These are the inventors, guys. These are the guys that tinker around with the little things and end up accidentally usually inventing something really awesome. Tinkerers are what keeps the world going. My father was a tinker, actually. He loved to tinker around in the shop. And then on Saturday, April 3rd, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit will be back again with another episode of the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. That's right. On Saturday, he'll be talking about calendar stones. Around the world, there are many, many ancient megalithic monuments that were built as calendar stones to keep up with the days of the solstice and the equinox. And this is a very intriguing topic, and him and I were just having a discussion about this the other day. It's a topic you guys definitely need to tune in for. Saturday, April 2nd, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show on Ripon Common Sense Radio. That's right. Then on Sunday, we're going to take a trip over to Easter Island. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Sunday, April 4th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows here on the network are 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. So make sure you mark that on your calendars, especially Sunday's show, as we travel to Easter Island and discuss the Rapa Nui and the heads of Easter Island and the mysterious things that surround that place. And you guys are definitely not going to want to miss this discussion. And that's going to round out the weekend here on Ripon Common Sense Radio and RippinRabbitHole.com. And speaking of RippinRabbitHole.com, make sure you guys hop on over there and sign up for our backstage VIP pass. That's right. It is absolutely free. You can join us backstage and unlock all of the amazing benefits of the RippinRabbitHole.com, because there are quite a few. Like what, you may ask? Like the ability to jump down the rabbit hole. That is our social media alternative over there, and someplace we enjoy free speech and enjoy sharing information without being censored by those that say that it's, false information when it's true. We don't have that issue on the RippinRabbitHole.com, ladies and gentlemen. Come on over and hang out with us down the rabbit hole with the rest of the Rippin' Rabbits. Also, while you're over there, make sure you drop in the 24/7 Backstage Lounge to hang out live with the Rippin' Rabbits and myself right after the show. That's right. And all you need to do is sign up once again for that Backstage Pass. That's also going to get you access to our email that we send out once a week on Wednesday with all the rabbit holes and the DarkWolf's Den shows that we'll be covering all weekend long. Remember, we have the most extended weekends in radio here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. We start on Wednesday and Thursday with the DarkWolf's Den show, kicking the weekend off right. And then AJ the Rippin' Rabbit rolls Friday through Sunday to keep the weekend going. As much fun and conversation as we can have in one weekend, you're going to have right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network and the RippinRabbitHole.com. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I am very proud to be a part of this network and to have every last one of you guys here with us around the world in all 49 countries we're heard in, as well as the internet and YouTube, guys. I am so honored to come to you guys every week with these topics, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate every last one of you guys being here, especially our amazing mod team over there. You guys are absolutely incredible. So on behalf of our mod team, ladies and gentlemen, as well as Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, Walt House, everybody involved in Rippin' Common Sense Radio, and everybody who has helped make this show the amazing success that it has become over almost the last year. On behalf of all these folks, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay awake, but dare to dream. Good night, everybody. How? Yeah, that's right.
Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner. Is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner. Is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a